Hey everyone. Hi Alexa, how are you doing?
I'm pretty good, and you?
Good, thank you. So welcome back everyone to the evening live stream for Rebel News here in Ottawa. And I have with me once again future Rebel News contributor TomMarazzo. Tom, how are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, so once again, Tom is almost always in the live stream. Tom, you were one of the Freedom Convoy organizers. So you had to deal with the city. So how did you feel today? Sorry about that. Listening to how the city felt dealing with you guys.
Yeah, it was actually quite an interesting day. For the longest time, even from day one after the testimony originally, I had repeatedly said over and over that I was very concerned about the fact that at no level of government was there any will to talk to us. And when you listen to the testimony today from the OPP, it's really interesting to hear that they actually seem to be advocating to talk to us or to set the conditions to get some really good, solid dialogue going. And if you watch the testimony of Brendan Miller today, it was just incredible because, or not the testimony, but his cross-examination of the OPP officer. It was incredible because he had shown in the evidence a memo that the OPP had drafted recommending that we actually have a meaningful negotiation. And I don't like to use the word negotiation. I prefer to use the word like a dialogue with the government. And the federal government outright rejected it and then declared the Emergency Act.
Yeah, 100%. That was such a shocking moment, a huge mic drop, and we'll get back to that later when we talk about Marcel Baudin. But right before we start, I just want to remind everyone that you can always chat with us through the chat function, I believe, on Rumble and other platforms that we are on. If you want to give us your thoughts about the Emergencies Act inquiry that is happening right now here in Ottawa, or anything in general. I think you're starting to get very familiar with Tom at this point. So today we had two witnesses. The first one was with the OPS, I believe. We had Russell Lucas. It's so funny when you spend your whole day live tweeting the whole thing. When you spend the whole day just staying updated with everything, at the end your mind blanks when you need to talk about it. And then we also have a second witness with the OPP, Marcel Baudin, who spoke to us about very shocking things. Alexa, first time that you're really following closely the commission up to now. How did you feel watching everything unfold?
But I need to say that I was traveling, everybody, for the World Health Summit in Berlin. So I needed to catch up when I came back. But I was really shocked when I actually listened since the beginning what happened, because what they say is actually not what we notice on the ground every day. And I have the impression that all the witnesses today, they talk about communication. But I think the biggest problem was the communication between them, because at the end of the day, we didn't notice any changing in the police officer on the ground until that they give the first warning to all the truck drivers, telling them, I think it was a blue paper, probably Tom, you remember that, the blue paper that we were giving to all trucks, saying that if you're not leaving right now, you're facing criminal offense and you can be arrested. And after that, they gave, I think the day after, the red paper telling them that this is their last chance to live, or they will be arrested and they will have huge consequences on them. But before that, police were really smiling and really helpful to every people that were there at the protest. And when we were talking to them and asking them, oh, did you notice any violence, any trouble? And they were no, not so far. And so what I saw so far from the testimony of the witnesses is not accurate of what happened on the ground. What is your point of view for you, Tom?
Well, it's really interesting because there is a very, very noticeable difference in the level of professionalism and attitude between the Ottawa police and the OPP. and really seeing and listening to the testimony today. But I have to say, the first witness today, I think his name is
Russell Lucas.
Lucas, thank you. He was, I actually made a comment to him at the end of his testimony in the day. I just saw him in the hall in the aisle really quickly. And I said, had our request to talk to an inspector been granted and they sent you to us, I don't think most of this would have even happened. I don't think it would have progressed to the point of the violence that we saw on those last 2 days. And, there's also comments too, where they kept alluding to the fact that, in previous testimony, that the communication broke down. And that's categorically false. What actually happened was, I had requested, instead of talking to the 2 police liaison sergeants that I was dealing with, I had requested through the OPP liaison officer and through the OPS officer that I didn't deal with them anymore. I wanted somebody of a higher rank. And it's funny because the testimony of Inspector Lucas today revealed that had we been granted that, I think a lot of this would have been very, very different. And I think he, after listening to his testimony, would have been the right person for the job, right temperament, professional, straightforward, very deliberate thinking man. Things would have been a lot different than they actually turned out. And now you contrast that, not contrast, actually, you compare it to the testimony we heard from the OPP today, Marcel. And it was incredible because, I was saying to somebody today that if the movie ever gets done or the screenplay about this convoy gets written, this is the way I see it. You've got a group of the protesters, and you have a group of law enforcement, and they were all trying to come to a good resolution to this entire thing. But at the top, you had the political class that were interfering with both groups. And so we ended up getting the Emergency Act was declared because of the political interference at every level of government. It seems everything from the municipal, and we heard the testimony of the mayor and the councillors. We are possibly going to hear testimony from the Ontario government if Doug Ford.
Well, he's getting
trying to fight it.
too.
He's getting summons, but he's actually trying to fight the summons to come in a
unbelievable lack of transparency. But you mentioned testimony of the first witness, Russell Lucas. Let's see what he had to say about misinformation earlier today.
In your witness statement, you noted that there was an issue with misinformation and disinformation and its impact on the policing of the Freedom Convoy. Could I just ask you to expand on that?
Yes, and there's a couple really good examples. So I've learned a lot, and the power of social media has evolved, and it continues to evolve. And when we look at when somebody sends out, we try to put out information from legitimate sources, and you try to make sure that they're verified. So we always refer people back to our website to look for true information. Misinformation comes when people are sending out unintentionally wrong information, and then it gets shared, and then you're trying to put that genie back in the bottle. And then the other issue was the disinformation, where people are knowingly putting out false information, and which is drawing on resources or creating a different narrative that you're trying to deal with. So, like for example, the wooden fence that's up protecting the construction site on Parliament Hill was being shared repeatedly over and over again, saying they're fortifying Parliament Hill in advance of the arrival of the convoys, and it was inflaming people. But you're trying to get the information out through your PLTs. It's there. It's construction. There's a big pit on the other side. We don't want people to get hurt, and that was a big challenge to try and stay ahead of.
It's always a big topic for everyone in the political sphere, and just today we saw Bill C-11, which is supposed to allegedly fight misinformation, promoting content online. Pablo Rodriguez's favorites and censorship bill go through second reading in the Senate. So, it's such a big issue. But from the way I see it, the biggest source of misinformation we've seen from the beginning of the convoy was from the side of the government. the government was saying that the protesters were not willing to engage. They were irrational. We saw Jim Watson, I believe it was Jim Watson who said that protesters were irrational, which I scrummed him on, by the way, afterwards. And yet then we see in the evidence that is shown in front of the committee that Keith Wilson, the lawyer representing the protesters, was willing to engage with the city, was willing to, move the trucks, get the truck moved. We even saw protesters say that they were willing to get the truck moved as well. And not only does the evidence show that, but the editorialized version of the event shows it as well. Because we saw from email messages between, I believe, Lucas and the government, or Lucas and the OPP, we saw them talk about how protesters were willing to move, protesters were willing to engage with the government, were willing to have negotiation. So it shows that even in their own editorialized view of the situation, they saw that protesters were willing to engage. I think that's what you probably felt on the ground as well.
Yes, absolutely. There was a will, but again, what I've stated before is that each truck is an individual owner operator. Yeah. And we saw that our role was to always focus on what we were there to do, which was to end the federal COVID-19 mandates for all federal employees, and really, to put the pressure on the government to end all this nonsense. And, the belief there too is, because a lot of people have been coming out after me on Twitter saying, or social media saying, yeah, but they were provincial mandates. Well, I'm sorry, but there was federal mandates, and the leadership of this country starts at the top. And if the federal mandates would have ended, then clearly the provinces would have started to relax it too, because it's the federal government that started it, and everybody else followed suit. And so, the intention was to always relieve as much pressure on the residents as possible, but maximize the pressure on the federal government. And that's a hard balance to achieve.
I believe that's why you guys were willing to move to Wellington Street instead of staying in the original streets in Ottawa. No, 100%.
You will probably agree with me, Tom, that at the beginning when all the truck arrived, I think it was on 29, it was completely a chaos. Okay, it was like everybody was parked a little bit everywhere, and it was not well made. But I remember during a night, waking up the morning, and all the truck was aligned, and they actually make an empty line fluid for like the circulation. And I remember that all happened during a night. After that, probably you had a discussion with the mayor. I don't know, but I don't really recall which day it was. But I recall that the day after, every single truck was really well parked. And they make like an empty line for the emergency car and police car to pass through everywhere. I think I recall one street that was really blocked, or maybe two, but that's it. All of the other street was okay.
Even the testimonies today, and even yesterday as well, from Lucas today and other testimonies we've heard, also confirm what you're saying, Alexa, that the streets were not fully clogged. There were lanes still open. The traffic was under control. The highways were dealt with. All the testimonies point to that. And I just want to go back to the misinformation things once again. A lot of people said that ambulances weren't able to go through because the streets were clogged. That's part of misinformation. That's the misinformation from the leftist point of view in front of government. So no one's going to call it out. Also, earlier today, we saw Lucas, quote unquote, say that he understood the role of the Freedom Convoy to raise awareness and show discontent in regards to government overreach in relation to COVID-19 mandates. But an enormous amount of people said that you guys are coming here to overthrow the government. But even Russell admits that wasn't the case.
And, there's... this is all optics, right? And you've heard the phrase "perception is reality," and so when the mainstream media has really the largest megaphone that they can use and to shout on behalf of the federal government, and I'll try to bring the point back to the federal government, and I've already alluded to it about the fact they didn't want to talk, but when the federal government is creating this narrative and they're using the government-funded liberal media to shout this at the top of their lungs and bombard people in their homes through their TVs with it. Of course, that narrative actually starts to work. And it's interesting because I don't think that a lot of we've noticed that the legacy media isn't not actually covering any of the testimony now. And so the megaphone that they used to vilify the convoy, they're not using to vindicate the convoy right now. And so there's another thing that I actually noticed recently throughout this whole thing. It kind of just came to me this morning, is that there's our lawyers, Brendan Miller and Bathsheba Vandenberg, and then there's the JCCF lawyers, there's the Democracy Fund lawyers, and there's one other law firm, but they don't get a lot of airtime. What's really interesting to me is that we are the only group that are actually focusing on the issues of the justification for the Emergency Act. We're the only group. All of the other lawyers, the other teams, are focusing on basically covering their asses. This is a big exercise in CYA, and that's what they're all doing. So when you listen to the testimony, their testimony doesn't really talk about the justification of using the Emergency Act. It talks about, how do I transfer responsibility to somebody else for the decision that I made?
And I think that's the reason why Chief slowly got a counsel, because he wants to make sure that he's safe from everything, that if people try to put the blame on him, he has someone there to represent him and fight back against him. Not 100%. It's so interesting because you guys are actually the only one there to focus on civil liberties and the issue of whether or not it was justified, instead of focusing on feelings and microaggression. We should throw to another clip from today's testimony from Lucas, saying that the direction that came down was, we're not giving them 1 inch.
So the lost opportunity, you say, is because you could not use PLT? I'm just trying to understand what happened, what was the lost opportunity and what caused it? So, and there, again, so when they had that first, again, this is the earliest days of the protest with Rideau Sussex. If they had the opportunity to bring them out of Rideau Sussex, it would have freed up that whole side of the canal. And the direction that came down was, we're not giving them 1 inch. So that's what we worked with. And then again, so we're spread thin, and now the next few days, it's just about building a stabilization plan so that we're not burning our members out, and that getting enough rotation of food and things like that before we can get into the next phase of an operation.
We're not giving them 1 inch. What does that mean to you?
Well, that says to me, that statement right there, what it clearly says to me is that certain elements of the OPS were focusing on finding the balance again between people's legal right to peacefully assemble versus the political class and maybe some of the leadership within OPS that from day one were setting all of the conditions in place for extraordinary powers so that they could go in and break the convoy. So you could see by that statement to me and the expression on him, and that's why I was referring to him today, saying, had I been, or we been given the inspector that we requested, and had we been given him, I think we would have had a very different outcome. Because to me, listening to his testimony, he seemed like a reasonable, measured person who wanted to make the balance between public safety, public order, but the public's right to peacefully assemble.
Peacefully protest,
And this is the thing, and you can tell in his statement that elements within his own department and the political class in the town didn't want that. They never wanted to communicate. They didn't want to be seen as negotiating. They definitely didn't want to listen. And I mean, if you really want to know the evidence of why they didn't want to listen, well, look at the facts. They only ever, they say that this is the largest protest that they've ever had in this city. And the highest ranking person they ever let us speak to was a sergeant who's a part-timer on the police liaison team.
Yeah, and when you talk about an unwillingness to cooperate, I'm trying to hold on to this clip until the very end, because there's so much more to cover today. But we saw later during Marcel Baudin's testimony that the federal government was given a plan to be able to negotiate and deal with the convoy peacefully. And right after they were given this plan,
it was written, the plan,
yeah.
I got to say, the plan was written by the OPP.
Yeah, exactly. The OPP wrote their own plan. It was given to the federal government, and right after seeing that plan, they invoked the Emergencies Act.
Yeah, so they were briefed, and that's what Brendan said in his exit statement with the OPP, is that because this Baudin did not know that his memo or his document that he had written, because he was negotiating with a deputy minister. That's who he was interfacing with in the PMO's office, or one of the deputy ministers. And his memo was forwarded, and cabinet was actually briefed on his memo, on his plan, and they outright rejected it, and they chose the Emergency Act, which is, interesting, because we have seen in Brendan Miller's opening comments again, and then when he was cross-examining the intelligence, the head of intelligence for the OPP, on two different occasions when Brendan Miller got out there, he demonstrated clearly that they could not meet the standard of the Section 2 of the CSIS Act. Thereby, it was illegal to use the Emergency Act. And so really, what more do we really have to talk about?
Yeah,
we've seen the evidence.
The whole case is right there, unless you want to focus on microaggression, the impact on residents.
So we know now that they were aware that the leader and the protester wanted to talk, to have a discussion with the government. So now it's obviously, we know that they were aware about that, and they refused. They say no negotiation. But they knew that having this discussion will have end that protest right away, because probably we will have some discussion, because a little bit after the convoy finished, we saw the mandate lifting a little bit everywhere, and like we saw some changing in life, okay? But having just this discussion between the government and the protester will have changed so much in how this protest will have finished. But they refuse it. And I just want to know your point of view of the fact that the government was aware and they refused to agree to have a discussion with you and Tamara Lich.
Well, it's interesting, because why would an elected official whose mandate, it's actually, I looked it up, I even posted it on Twitter, the terms of reference, the terms of employment for being a member of parliament is, your mandate is to talk to constituents and hear grievances. And so the fact that the federal government outright rejected any suggestion to meet with us, they viewed us not as citizens, not as voters, not as people that had a constitutional right to assemble. They viewed us as terrorists, their own people. That's ridiculous. And I'm offended by it. I'm appalled by it. And I would have thought, though, one of the things that I would have thought was, they knew that they had, like myself, a retired military officer. They had police officers. We were all publicly known. We were not hiding our careers or our identities. And yet they still, they didn't look at our professionalism, our resumes, where the background we came from, and look at that and say, you know what, maybe we should think twice when you've got former military officers, former police officers coming out and speaking out against us. Maybe we want to take these people seriously, right? Like, we had doctors there amongst us. We had lawyers, we had military, we had police, we had all sorts of, and I don't like to classify it this way, but we had a lot of white collar people amongst our ranks. We had a lot of blue collar people. We were all meshed together, working together. And so when you've got the two groups coming together for one common cause, I don't know how the government ignores that.
Well, it's always easier to vilify your opposition, even though they're clearly not what you say they are, and even though you know that they are not what you say they are. We're going to go to an ad really quick. When we come back, we're going to look at Marco Mendicino's justification of the use of the never-seen-before anti-terrorism law called the Emergencies Act.
Thursday in Ottawa, the Public Order Emergencies Commission kicked off. It's an inquiry into the actions of the government, or at least it's supposed to be. The inquiry is allegedly meant to examine whether or not the government was justified in invoking an anti-terrorism law called the Emergencies Act to euthanize peaceful anti-COVID mandate protests taking place in the nation's capital, but also in other locations across the country.
My choice! My body! My choice!
Now, the convoy to Ottawa spent nearly 4 weeks completely peacefully demonstrating against lockdowns and vaccine passports. It evolved into a nearly month-long street party replete with bouncy castles, hot tubs, street hockey, concerts, and community outreach efforts like soup kitchens and food for the homeless. Rebel News, as we were for the convoy to Ottawa, will be there on the ground in Ottawa to cover the commission from the beginning to the end, because you just cannot trust the mainstream media. And in fact, that's what today's report is about. We've rented an Airbnb in Ottawa where we're sending a rotating cast of journalists to report on the Public Order Emergency Inquiry. Now, you can help support our efforts there at truckercommission.com. The mainstream media's reporting about the alleged foreign nature of the convoy funding was cited as a reason the Liberals invoked the Emergencies Act to arrest, detain, and seize the property, bank accounts, and assets of anti-Trudeau demonstrators.
Pass, I'll see. Oh, sorry, we're back now. So I guess just to begin, we'll take a look at what our great, amazing, now it's Bill Steele-Evans about to probably pass. I have to say that our amazing public safety minister, Marco Mendicino, talking about his justification of the use of the Emergencies Act.
With regards to the question about Commissioner Lucky's correspondence, none of that, of course, changes her testimony before the Standing Committee of Public Safety last spring, where she said very clearly that the Emergencies Act was needed to resolve the situation on the ground, not only in Ottawa but across the country, both peacefully and swiftly. And this was a government decision. We listened carefully to the array advice that we were getting at the time. We consulted with various partners provincially, territorially, etc. But we took the decision because it was necessary. We took the decision because this was a situation that was without precedent. We took the decision because the impacts to Canadians, to workers, to families, to vulnerable citizens who required essential health care treatment, including, as we've heard, those who were needing chemotherapy at the time, compelled us to act. And it worked. And now we're going to continue to cooperate with the Commission to make sure that we take whatever lessons are necessary.
I think if Mendicino really cared about the impact on Canadians and farmers and workers, he would have lifted the mandates a little bit earlier. I think that's the reason why you guys were here, right?
It wasn't. Sorry, but me, I kept like stopping laughing when I heard him saying, "Oh, it was so needed for like stopping honking or stopping like pollution coming from trucks, and it really needed coming from citizens that say that they were harassed and attacked." When I was on the ground and I was asking them, when they came to me and say, "This is outrage, what is going on? They are a danger for us." And I say, "Oh, can you explain me like a situation you faced it?" And say, "It's not happening to me, but I know someone that happened to someone that he knows."
I've read in the media. I've read in the media.
Like, exactly. So I never found someone who were capable to testimonize their own story about something that happened to them facing the protester. Not at all. I tried to find someone because I'm here for reporting both sides of the story, and none of them were able to testimonize something related to the protester.
Well, that's the whole story of the commission. That's the whole point of the commission. It's Jim Watson saying that there's protesters that got their masks ripped off, but saying that he saw it in the media. That's the whole point of what's happening.
And this is the really disturbing part, right? We're talking about violence, and when questioned yesterday, Chief Bell said we looked at the data. There was only 5 arrests in 17 days. And actually it wasn't 16. It was actually 17 days because there was days that they didn't actually have acts of violence. 5. There was 5 arrests for violence for 17 days leading up to the Emergency Act. And then when pressed what he meant by violence, he said it was more the feeling of violence, right? And it wasn't a real thing. So I got a question for you and you. Raise your hand if you've ever been shot in the leg point blank by a ballistic projectile. There we go. Thank you. Right? So here we are. We're talking about violence. And as far as I'm concerned, the only violence that I saw was what happened to you, Alexa, what happened to Candace and the other gentleman that were run over by the horse, people that were beaten, Chris Deering, who's a friend of mine who is a veteran, and many other veterans, Jeff Averly, who was also beaten by the police, and all the civilians that were lined up. And we heard testimony again today where the Ottawa police, yesterday when Bell was on the stand, Bell was saying, he kind of contradicted himself in terms of where the people were dropped off. Because Brendan, we looked at the place where the people were arrested, then told they wouldn't be charged, and then driven out to the board of the city. And he acknowledged there was no building there. Yeah. Right. And that they were basically abducted and then dropped off without charge.
Well, that you weren't there yesterday, but that's one of the things that your lawyer Keith Wilson spoke to us about, the story of a 30-year-old mother. Who was arrested, violently beaten up by the police, then brought kilometers away from Ottawa, and then just dropped up there.
Yeah, so that's actual violence, not the feeling or the perception of violence that we're talking about, right? And so we have noticed along the lines of, as soon as somebody gets on the stand and gives testimony, based on the lexicon that they use or the vocabulary, right away which way they're going to try to spin their entire testimony.
For sure.
That is the lens that they're looking at everything. And maybe that's what they truly believe. But I don't know how you're dealing with a domestic, which you perceive to be an emergency in your town, but you're at home every night watching CBC. That part I don't get.
Well, I don't think that's actually what they believe, because once again, you see their editorialized version of what was happening. They were talking about the protesters as peaceful protesters that were willing to cooperate. That's another thing once again. But no, definitely a lot of good stuff from the first witness. Now to move on to the second witness, Tom, I learned today that you are extremely famous. I heard from Marcel Dubien that if you had left the city, 60% of the protesters would have left as well.
Follow you.
No, exactly. So pretty interesting stuff from Marcel Dubien. But I had a question for you, because you were one of the people that had to deal with the police and basically the police liaison team. And we heard you... what's his name? Baudin. We heard Baudin say that, basically the way he was talking about the police liaison team, the PLT, he was talking about them as if they were lazy, as if they weren't doing the best job, because they were often just together talking to each other in a room. What was your experience dealing with the PLT?
So from what I saw, I had a bit of a different perception of what he was trying to say. And a lot of the stuff, and this is really kind of fascinating to me, because when I really do feel like when I'm listening to the OPP versus OPS, it is such a contrast in a difference of I don't want to say professionalism, because I've seen a few members of OPS that were professional in some of the testimony, like the one that we had the first witness today. But there's just a difference in mentality. I really felt like the OPP had made every possible attempt, like I said, to strike that balance between allowing people to peacefully protest, but also maintaining public order.
Yeah.
And I feel like the OPP really struggled against, or to try to align with, what the OPS was doing, because the OPP were kind of free of all the political interference. They weren't getting pressured that I've seen from any level of government right now, whereas the OPS had the politicians, including the PMO's office, right in their shorts the whole time. And so you see the difference in political interference. Yes, Marcel Baudin, and I, other than a few comments that he had made today, I have to say my gut feeling from the testimony I saw from him was that he was fighting really hard to always keep this safe and responsible, to protect the protesters, protect the police, protect the public. I think that's just my read. I'm willing to be wrong on that, but he's one of the ones that surprised me, and so did Morris when he and he's OPP as well, the head of intelligence. Very, very different perception I got coming from them, where they were actually. They were trying to be honest brokers and find the balance. For OPS for like, no, this is all about extraordinary
I think they were
power.
still trying while they were doing what you were saying. I think they were still trying to pander to what the chief of the OPS, the chief of the Ottawa Police Services, and everything were saying, because Baudin did say that if you guys didn't go home, there would be consequences for you. He did say a few quotes, as you were saying, but where I would agree with you is seeing his reaction after he learned that the cabinet didn't, take into consideration his negotiation suggestion, his plan suggestion, and instead decided to invoke the Emergencies Act. That's a clip that I was holding off for the whole night. Let's take a look at that.
Yeah,
his face is actually.
Yeah, he was surprised. He was totally caught off guard by it.
Yeah, let's take a look at the clip.
Well, I don't exactly know what date it was. It may have been the 10th of January, somewhere around, February, somewhere around there. But I had been called by Deputy Commissioner DeMarco, saying that the Deputy Minister of Public Safety Canada was looking to reach out to me, and then I don't know how that came to be, but ultimately that's how that came through. It was from Deputy DeMarco to myself, a call at night, and just saying, this is going to happen with this. Is this something that you would be interested in assisting us with?
Okay. But it was your understanding, based on information from your team, that there were people who were prepared, people on the protester side who were prepared to have this type of meeting.
Yeah, like I'm assuming like TomMarazzo was one name that came forward. Tamara Litch was one name that came forward. So there was people that had stepped up as being leaders and had people following them. Yeah, so I don't exactly know what date it was. It may have been the 10th of January, somewhere around, February, somewhere around there. But I had been called by Deputy Commissioner DeMarco, saying that the Deputy Minister of Public Safety Canada was looking to reach out to me, and then.
Yeah, that wasn't the right clip. Sorry about that, but we still heard your name in there.
Yeah, so even that there was like this will from members. So you heard Deputy Minister for, I think, Public Safety was looking to see if there was any space on behalf of the federal government to talk to any of us. So I thought that was kind of interesting. My name being called was sort of an obvious choice. I mean, I had by that point made some public statements saying that we want to talk to you. So that's nothing about me other than publicly identifying and saying, look, we want to talk. So talk to us. And I had been communicating that through the OPP as well as through the OPS. Yeah. And even with Steve K, there was always a will to talk. And it was, honestly, I have to say, it was a little bit refreshing to hear Baudin there say that, they were advocating for this because I think that, again, they were trying to strike that right balance, right? Right. But we had this political interference again.
No, for sure. And I think now we actually do have the clip ready. So let's take a look at the actual clip from our great lawyer. Well, you're a great lawyer, Brendan Miller
time
from Alberta.
I understand this is an email from the Deputy Minister of Public Safety, Rob Stewart, to you, right?
Yes.
Okay. And in the third sentence on the top paragraph, it says, we have a big meeting this afternoon. Well, this will be discussed. So I really need your input, right?
Yes.
All right. Did you know that meeting was at 3:30 p.m. and that it was with Cabinet and it was the incident response group of the political executive meeting and that your proposal was provided to them?
No.
Okay. It was. I can tell you that. And then they invoked the Emergencies Act. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next.
Just amazing the way Miller closed his laptop at the same time. You were in the room. How was that feeling for you guys?
Well, I've gotten to know Brendan, and he's a brilliant mind, and he's absolutely has an outstanding sense of humor.
He's
and
great,
you know, he's also a law professor.
Yeah, that's
part-time
true.
law professor. And I've asked him, I'm like, Brendan, can I sit in on your classes? I think they'd be great. Like, I've learned a lot from the whole entire legal team, right? I'm getting my my law degree through osmosis, just hanging around these brilliant minds, right? And so, but you know, joking aside, it's important that I kind of bring that up, because I'm not trying to be like, in the Army, we call it a barrack room lawyer, right? Where everybody thinks they know the law.
Yeah, they know the law, yeah.
I've got access to these brilliant minds, so I ask them very good questions. And sometimes I go off on these weird tangents, and the lawyers sit me down, calm me down, and say, look, this is really what it's about. And that has been really, really interesting for me. So when I got up and when I watched his close or his exit with the OPP, I thought it was brilliant, right? I understood where he was going with it. And it's hard to kind of unpack if you're not kind of getting the background explanation. But what I can say with that is that it was I had learned where Brendan was going to go with this just before he actually got up there and did his cross with the OPP. And I like, if I could have went and made popcorn and sat there and had popcorn and drank pop, like it would have been like watching Top Gun for the 4th time.
No, it was such a great moment, Alexa.
It was great.
It's just because I have the impression that a lot of them, a lot of people were on the ground working, didn't know the impact that their decision or what they will say or what they will write, what it will be the impact of it. And I think now it's just exploding in his face, saying like, oh, you did that, boom, that happened. And it just like probably gets shocked, saying like, at that time, I was not really aware that what I would say will have as much consequences on what is going on. And when we look at the 3 witnesses just today, a lot of them were not aware of so many different topics of what was happening on the ground. So how, without knowing all these information, you are capable to write and to be sure of what you are writing is okay, because you have a lack of information that is missing. You cannot like take a rational decision, I would say.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think from this clip, I have 3. I know you got to get off in just shortly, but from this clip, I think there's a few things that we can talk about. So, you know, his face at the end, I think it went back to what you said earlier, that he was shocked about the fact that the Parliament didn't listen to him, that the cabinet did not listen to him. And I think it goes to show that maybe he wasn't as bad as the other bad guys that are in
and you know, there was another instance where he was speaking about the night that they raided Coventry. And from what I heard, the testimony where he actually advised against it. And I remember, and I'm not gonna, I won't elaborate further because it'll likely come out in my testimony next week. So I don't want to kind of give that piece away. But his read of the situation, and his advice before Coventry, I think was he read the situation perfectly, and he made that known to the OPS. And again, the OPS leadership had no will to do anything other than exercise force. And let me qualify that too. There's a certain OPS officer that his name keeps coming up. He has not been called to the witness list, and that may or may not change. But this particular individual seems to be somebody who had a very strong orientation towards aggressive police response.
Interesting.
And so he may or may not be called, and I don't want to be dramatic or anything like that, but his name keeps coming up, but he's not on the list. But he ultimately was the one running the show, making the final decision on whether or not to go into to Coventry. So I find that very interesting because the OPP had actually, from what I heard today, was recommending against the night they went in and raided Coventry for all that fuel. And I do want to say they stole fuel. And what's interesting is the day before they stole the fuel, we had the city fire inspector come and look at it.
Oh, yeah?
And then the day after they stole the fuel, the inspectors came back again and looked at the fuel. So why they felt like this was such a hot potato that they had to move on right away.
Huge risk.
Yeah. And we also had, so people understand, we've also had actual inspections from the Electrical Safety Authority on a big hydro panel that we set up with generators, and that's what they were using for electricity in the parking lot, and it was inspected. We paid for it and passed an Electrical Safety Authority's inspection. So when they talk about safety and fuel storage and all that stuff, it's categorically false, and we do have the proof.
No, it's all political for sure. And there's one thing that I wanted to throw at regarding the last clip. Later on, the GCCF lawyer asked Mr. Baudin, had negotiations up to that point been handled differently? The situation could have been different. Do you agree with that? Baudin said yes. Later on in the same testimony, he was asked the same question, basically in a different format, but was asked the same thing once again. And he did agree that had negotiations actually occurred, the situation could have been handled differently without the Emergencies Act. So had the cabinet actually listened to the OPP recommendations, the situation would have been handled a lot differently, according to this witness. Listen, it's 7 p.m. right now. I know we have another interesting guest coming on afterwards. So I guess we'll just throw to a little ad. Thanks for joining us again today, Tom. And we'll definitely see each other shortly.
Definitely.
In pickup trucks, which is a different vehicle, which is a weapon in itself, but the weaponized description to me is really the rigs who take space on the street and make noise through the horns that you've shown in video, the fumes. That's the description of the weapon, is that truck took space on the road, plus a number of microaggressions. I describe them as microaggressions. All these microaggressions. Plus a number of microaggressions. I describe them as microaggressions. All these microaggressions.
Hey folks, from October 13th to November 25th, we are here in Ottawa for the Emergencies Act inquiry organized by the Public Order Emergency Commission. But why the Emergencies Act inquiry? Well, because during the Freedom Convoy back in February, Justin Trudeau used a never invoked before Emergencies Act to basically seize protesters' bank accounts, seize protesters' money, seize their assets, trample their civil liberties. So we're here this month for the next month and a half to figure out if the way the government acted was lawful and was appropriate. So we are here to hold the government accountable, but we need your help. We are here to cover it for you because everyone else here is mainstream media. So if you want to help us cover it, if you want to help us bring you the other side of the story, factual, actual news, go to truckercommission.com and consider making a donation.
If people, and assuming there were demonstrators who wanted to continue a lawful demonstration because their aims had not been yet achieved, was there an option made available to them somewhere, some way to do that?
I think during it, sir, like there was opportunities every day for people to take part in lawful, peaceful, safe demonstrations, and throughout it, there was not people saying, okay, let's go and we're going to go here. And so when people were leaving, right? So not everyone got arrested, right? Like you can go anywhere, but you just can't be on the street here, right? So if you'd like, walk that way, go over there, whatever. And if someone wanted to set up on wherever, I'm sure there would potentially be an intervention or whatever, or a conversation or whatever. But as long as it was lawful, peaceful, safe, I don't really know if anyone would have done anything about it. But that being said, I understand that there was such a dire need to clear and regain those streets that they need to return it to a state of normalcy.
We're back here again in Ottawa with Angelica Toy, one of our people from Alberta. How are you doing today, Angelica?
Doing good, thank you.
Good, great. So Angelica is going to also be covering everything that's happening here in Ottawa with you, Alexa, as well. You're going to be here for the whole week, right? You're going to be covering everything for the whole week.
Are you talking to me?
To you, yeah.
We see I'm actually like as available to cover as much as possible because I was on the ground since the whole month. The same after like the convoy was dismantled, I was still there and I was still observing what is happening with the police and the red zone that they call in the. So hi, Angelica. I never had the chance to meet you in person. So, what is your thought so far? Like, I don't know if you were like you were probably aware about the Freedom Convoy in Ottawa, but what is your thought to see what happened in Ottawa and what is happening now in this inquiry about the Emergency Act?
So I only got to see what Ottawa looked like through media, through my friends who were there. And what I saw was just a bunch of Canadians who were completely peaceful. I mean, there were videos of them dancing in the streets and feeding the homeless. They were putting warm gloves on people who were cold. And it was just a big, loving community who were there to, fight for their ability to survive, because a lot of those people, they had nothing to lose. So that's why they were there. They had no choice because the government put them in a very tough position. And right now I'm seeing, the evidence come out that there was no violence. We've heard it many times, only feelings of violence, which obviously does not fall under the Section 2 of the CSIS Act. So it's nice to see the truth of that finally come out. But I'm still pretty disappointed in the Emergencies Act, because it's obvious here that it wasn't necessary, as they were able to make negotiations, as we saw with Marcel Bowden. He was able to make negotiations to remove people from Confederation Park. So,
and I think you were able to catch Marcel Bowden earlier. Yeah. I don't know if we can throw to that clip with sound. We can see that you had the chance to ask him a question earlier.
Oh, yeah.
Protest sites during the negotiation. Do you think that the actions of the federal government invoking the Emergencies Act that ended that ability? Once again, you were part of a team that cleared up protest sites through negotiation. Do you think that the actions of the federal government invoking the Emergencies Act ended that ability?
I know there's an OPP media person that you could probably reach out to if you reach out to Bill Dixon.
Okay, thank you.
So how was it? I know since the beginning of the Emergencies Act inquiry, I've always been asking questions. How was it feeling? How did you feel being the one having the microphone, actually going after him?
To be honest, I wanted, my question answered. I saw him right away and I was like, hey man, I'm interested to know, because they were there on scene and ultimately they're the ones who know the truth. So yeah. No, definitely interesting. Yeah, and
you're more polite than I will be, because with his answer about the fact that the dismantle was professional and pretty well made, and no really use of overpower from the police have been done. I would have said that. Were you aware that some people were beat up? And I'm not talking just about men, but women as well. Did you aware that some people were pepper spray, shot in the legs? Like, have you been aware of that, or you just listen what you just saw through media? Because I'm not sure it was actually on the ground there that these 2 days, and I'm really curious where it take his information from.
Yeah, and talking it once again from underground journalism, underground experiencing. I know, Alexa, you were underground February throughout the whole Freedom Convoy. And earlier we heard the third witness of the day. I believe his name is Superintendent Bernier, talk about allegations that the protesters came to Ottawa to quote unquote take over the capital. Is that what you were feeling when you were walking around talking to people or through the capital?
So the people were there, most of the people were surrounding their trucks for like making sure that their truck was okay. And the other people were volunteering to feed the other people around, make sure that they were okay, shoveling the snow, that nobody injured themselves, and taking like all the garbage from the street, for making sure that the street was clean so that people will see them as good citizen, because they were not there for creating like any damage of the city or anything. They were just there for asking and requesting the lifting of the mandate. And same if everybody was coming from different walk of life, they were there for the common goal to just see their life back being normal again. And thinking over to the capital? No, I don't think so. No, not the people I actually witnessed so far.
Yeah, well, I think we spoke to a lot of people, and we don't have a lot of time left. There's two things that I want to make sure that we touch on before we leave this live stream. Angelica, you're from Alberta. We're actually being taken over right now. We've got two people in the Airbnb that are from the great province of Alberta, compared to one from Ontario and one from Quebec. So, Kian, I know you're listening. But Angelica, you're from Alberta. And we know that the Solicitor of Alberta, throughout the first day of the testimony of the Emergencies Act inquiry, showed her opposition to the use of the Emergencies Act, to the invocation of the Emergencies Act. How, from what you've been able to witness in Alberta, how are the people in Alberta feeling about the use of the Emergencies Act? Because we know you also had the Coutts blockade right there.
Well, from what I witnessed, people are pretty upset. I remember witnessing the protests that broke out in support of the Ottawa convoy, especially when they invoked the Emergencies Act, and the numbers grew large. I remember there was at least like 25,000 people marching in the streets, and people were very, very upset about that, because it was obvious that it was unnecessary.
Yeah, the emergency 100%. A great segue from that, Alberta. We all know Justin Trudeau doesn't like Alberta. In fact, in the past, Justin Trudeau once said that the country belongs to Quebecers when he was running with the Liberal Party. He says that it would be better if the government had more Quebecers in the government instead of Albertans. And Justin Trudeau, our national drama teacher today, spoke about the emergencies. He spoke about Doug Ford and his relationship with Doug Ford throughout the Freedom Convoy and before the invocation of the Emergencies Act inquiry. Can we show what our great drama teacher had to say?
Your reaction to Premier Ford fighting the summons to appear before the Emergency Commission? Should he appear? I will let the Emergency Commission manage its own witnesses. For my part, I was glad to offer to go as soon as we called the Commission, because it was an automatic part of when you invoke the Emergencies Act, you make sure that there's a public inquiry to look at why it's done, and that's exactly why we called it, and that's exactly why I'm looking forward to appearing. But I will say it was important that different orders of government were able to work together, and Premier Ford and I worked together well on delivering a return to normal for the citizens of Ottawa and people across the country.
But that's not what the transcript said. Like, how you said that he was out to lunch, he wasn't there. We've seen over the course of this inquiry a lot of different events happen at different times, and yes, there were times when our different orders of government weren't as aligned as we would have liked to be, but it's obvious that Premier Ford chose to stand with people of Ottawa, people of Ontario, people of Canada, and not with others. Merci beaucoup tout le monde.
You know, there's two things from what Justin Trudeau said right here. And the first thing, our government called for the Emergencies Act inquiry, but we all know that the inquiry is something that is forced to be done after the Emergencies Act is invoked, to make sure there's no authoritarian leader, Justin Trudeau, that would invoke it unjustifiably and unnecessarily. So that's one of the lies, well, not the lies, but a bizarre thing that Justin Trudeau said right here. Another thing also, we see Justin Trudeau always campaigning with Doug Ford. In fact, while Doug Ford was running to be the Premier of Ontario, Justin Trudeau was at multiple of his events. We almost felt like he was campaigning with Ford, for Ford. So definitely a bizarre thing, and I really hope that Doug Ford will be summoned and will appear in front of the committee.
But in the same time, like now that we know that the police have like most of the power for doing what they say, that they claim that they needed the Emergencies Act for doing their job, when we know that they were able to do it anyway without having it. And I don't know if you remember, but the Emergencies Act was voted on a Monday after like the weekend of the Dismantle Act passed. And I think it stands for less than 24 hours after that they drop it afterwards. So the question remains on, did you really need the Emergencies Act to be approved to justify the action that been made during the 2 days of dismantle? Because for having it done, like, I don't know if you recall how strong was their position on the need on that Monday of the Emergencies Act, for afterwards dropping it after less than 24 hours. The question remains why it was so important 24 hours before dropping it to have this Emergencies Act being voted.
Yeah. No, for sure. As I said, I'm super interested to see what Doug Ford had to say and how he can justify calling himself a conservative and standing with Justin Trudeau when it comes to trampling on the civil liberties of peaceful protesters that came here to protest the federal government's COVID-19 mandates and basically the federal government as a whole in general. Well, our time is almost up. Do we have any paid chats that we can read on air?
Do we have
Perfect.
some?
Let's take a look at them. I'll give you the honor of reading it, Alexa.
Gwendolini Young, $7. Thank you. Alexa, is it hard for you to be part of this after everything that you have through with the police? I would say it's like throwing back in the days and remembering, but the convoy was an amazing experience of knowledge and like experience of life. And I would say that it's not hard for me, because everything that I passed through there make me more strong, and my knowledge about all these experience grew me up. So I think for me it's actually good that I'm here for learning and for hearing what the people have to say about it. And I am one of the best person to say when it's wrong, when what they say it was actually wrong of what I was able to see on the ground.
Yeah, and I haven't heard one single witness so far talk about the fact that you were shot in the leg by an officer that was there. Not a single one. But they love to talk about microaggressions. They love to talk about phantom honkings. They love to talk about feelings that got hurt. Of course. Do we have another paid chat?
Razor, I let you say that one.
Oh, sure. All in capital. I like millions of other Canadians can't wait for the next elections to get rid of ourselves of that WEF child actor Trudeau and his Liberal Party. I hope it happens. I hope that we see some change in the government. Child actor, I like this one. I might use the next one instead of national drama teacher. Yeah, I'll see if Sheila lets me say it.
Yeah, I like it too.
Yeah, of course. Well, I think that's pretty much it for tonight. Well, we're already past the time that we were supposed to be at. Thank you for everyone that joined us tonight. Thank you for joining me as well, Angelica, and thank you for Alexa for your hard work today, watching everything that was happening.
Thank you so much, everybody. Have a good night.
Have a great evening.
Est-ce que je peux me répéter en anglais? So let me just repeat my answer in English. So, I really believe that we are in a very challenging time economically in Canada and also in the world.
And all you have to do is look across the Atlantic to see how important in challenging moments like today, institutional stability is for a country. Canada is the country of peace, order, and good government. That is very, very valuable, and it is more valuable today than ever. From my perspective, institutional stability very much includes the independence of the Bank of Canada,